Well, this is our last reading in Mark for a bit. Soon we're going to switch to a new church year. That's in 2 weeks. And then that's going to be the year of Luke. So we got to revel in our Mark. But first we get to the apocalyptic section of Mark. And this is a part that tends to make us a little nervous sometimes, with good reason. Because when somebody looks at these end-of-the-world predictions, literally, sometimes they try to calculate the date of the end of the world. And this happened as recently as 2012 with that guy camping, right? Well, he was wrong. Anyway, no one's managed to figure it out yet, which is good for us. But that's not the point of this kind of discourse. Jesus himself says later in Mark that no one knows the time when this will happen. So something much bigger is going on here. Now, prophets like Jesus have been preaching the end of times, or what we call eschatology, for thousands of years before Jesus and since Jesus. So here's a little definition of apocalyptic literature from David Lowes. He writes that, in a nutshell, apocalyptic literature stems from a world view that believes that everything happening on earth represents and correlates with a larger heavenly struggle between good and evil. It therefore reads into earthly events cosmic significance and anticipates future events on earth in light of a coming battle between the forces of God and the devil. Hence, it often tries to make sense of current events and experiences by casting them in a larger cosmic framework, and in this way gives comfort to people who are currently suffering or being oppressed. Got that? Got that, everyone? Okay. Well, so this type of literature is very symbolic, like the book of Revelation, which I talked about a few weeks ago. And all types of things can be read into it. And in our case, when Mark wrote this gospel, it was after the temple had been destroyed in 70 A.D. That same temple that the disciples marvel at in the beginning of the story and say, look how large this place is. These country disciples had never seen a building so big and so grand. And the people living in Mark's time, who would have read this text, had recently seen the Romans come and destroy their temple and take it over and oppress them even more than they were oppressed before. So they were living in a very dark time. So here Jesus reminds them that buildings come and go. They need to stay strong, to hang in there. There will be wars and destructions, but this is the birth pangs. Something new will happen eventually if you trust in God. And as far as predictions go, this one isn't very clear at all, right? There will be earthquakes in various places, and wars, and rumors of wars. Well, there's always been war and famine and suffering, which is why these stories do not make good predictors of the actual end of the world, or of anything really. Because back then, it was Rome sweeping in and crushing the Israelites. Then the Christian Roman Empire came and crushed their enemies. Then, England went and crushed their enemies. Then America came along and we started crushing our enemies. And now we have people fleeing Syria from their enemies. And last Friday, we had that horrible terrorist attack in Paris. But earlier in the week, there was a large attack in Beirut. And on Thursday, 147 students were killed in Kenya at a college. And there was a bombing at a funeral in Baghdad. That all happened last week. Not to mention all the diseases and famines and horrible genocide that still goes on in many countries in Africa. And even more locally, just down the road, we have drugs and gangs. And on Wednesday, Christ Church in Brentwood was broken into and vandalized by an 18-year-old man. So why am I telling you all these horrible things? Not to make you sad. But why do these things happen? That's the eternal question, and I can't answer that question for you. I think it's human nature. But the point is that we've been living in these end times forever. So what are we supposed to do about it? Just sit and wait? Because Jesus won't say when. He says that he doesn't even know when. So sometimes I wonder at the arrogance of us humans trying to figure out when. We don't know when the end will be, so we have to live like it could be anytime. The disciples marvel at the large stones of the temple, and Jesus reminds them that it is a building, and buildings fall down. So what are some of the large stones in our time that we marvel at? You know, they say when you come to New York City, don't walk around with your head up. Someone's going to steal your wallet. But anyway, what are some of the big, impressive stones that we marvel at? These stones that we hold up and revere so much that we end up worshiping them. Because so many things in our lives demand our attention and our loyalty, and so many things promise us happiness. For example, I always say, our fancy computers and our toys and our possessions, or maybe that promotion at work, or the dream of climbing the social ladder, the list goes on and on. But all these things come and go. If we hold those things up too much, we end up worshiping the gifts of God instead of God. Because toys will break, friendships end, but God is the constant. And in the midst of all this horrific human-made suffering that goes on in the world, where is God? And that's a valid question, too, that I can't answer for you. God is there, maybe not at first glance, but part of our job is to look for God in all people and in all situations. And that's the point of this passage today. Through all the trials and tribulations of life and the world, we can't forget God, or we will truly be lost amidst the chaos. Now, if you're one of those that focuses on when the end is, often that turns into thinking that life is a checklist to get into heaven. I do this, 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 and this, and then when Jesus comes back, I'm all set. If you're always trying to predict the end, you're focusing too much on the end, not focusing on living now, just waiting for the future. And we are living in the end times, but we've been living in the end times for thousands of years. So what matters is not when will the world end. That's going to happen in God's time. So Jesus says, do not worry about that. What matters is how we live while we're here. Will we worship our various man-made large stones? Or will we live out our days here in love and with compassion, letting God into our lives in the present time, not just in some distant, vague future? Looking for God in the now, in our friends, and in our neighbors, and in the world. And this is the true meaning of the name of our church, Emmanuel, which means
God with us.
Yay! God with us. As our motto says, God with us, in us, and through us. This is what it means to live in these apocalyptic times. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.